Thank you for tuning into the Equity Channel, where we provide the highest quality stock market analysis to individual investors. Our goal is to help you improve your returns while keeping you up to date with everything that you need to know. What helps investors beat the market is information and knowledge of how to use it. We'll provide you with both. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications because every time we drop a new episode, money is made. Uh, Today we're going to be talking about the January barometer. Today we're going to be talking about the January barometer. What does a strong January mean for stocks? All right. Um, Essentially, you're learning how to position yourself in the market based on what actually transpires in the month of January alone. This is going to be a weekly strategy. All right. We last week we dug into some strategies utilizing the monthly chart. This week we're going to be focusing on strategies from the weekly chart, and then next week we'll start to look on the daily chart. And I guess so. Every week we'll be dialing our way and in and out of these different time frames, but so you got a monthly strategy for yourself last week. This week, let's talk about what's happening now. And just for the record, if you really did pay attention last week, you know, I was already hinting that this was, one of those signals, and you got a nice solid push here. Now, there's no guarantee that this is going to continue after what we saw last week, but you could have already made money. Money was already made. Okay, money was already made. All right, so it's up to you whether or not you got some of that or not. Right, but that was easy. That was easy money right there. That was easy money. Right, but now this week we're going to talk about the January barometer, and we're going to go from there. What's up, Cecily? What's up, Kenneth? What's going on, Aldrin? Hope everybody's doing well. Let's talk about it. The January barometer. There's been a saying that's been around for decades, and the saying goes as such: however January goes, so does the market. And that saying lasted for, a very long time, up until a book was written by, what's this guy's name here? Jay Paple, I believe his name is. Right? He wrote a book called Seasonal Stock Market Trends, in which they took the January barometer to the next level. And he, being, making a pun on his name or a play on his name, recoined the January barometer. They call it the J New Wary barometer. Right? That's basically what we're going to be talking about today. Now, the good old January barometer that we're used to, it's very simple. You could just kind of work that from the monthly chart. It's like, hey, if January's up, we're long stocks, and that's kind of how they would do it back in the day. So January was up, we're long stocks. January is right. Look at that. January is up, we're long stocks. January is down, right? we're either short or we're out of the market, right? So now from here, from here, this was, like I said, it was a good notion, and that worked just fine for the most part. But there were some refinements made because there were certain periods that just didn't work out, right? So here's how they here's how they worked it out, right? So if it's a scoring system, right? It's a scoring system, and I'm going to go through the scoring system with you right now. So it involves the first week, right? The second, sorry, the full month, and the last week, right, of January. Okay. If the first week of January is up, you say, okay, cool. That'll be a one. If the full month of January is up, give it 1 point. If the last week is up, you give it 1 point. Right? If not, right, then you're giving them zeros. Right? If not, then you're giving them zeros. Right? That's how it works. So it's either a one or a zero for each of these three things. All right. If the first week of January is up, you give it a one. If the first week of January is down, you give it a zero. Right. And so we would grade the month of January. We would grade the month of January. Now, the statistics for this particular trade, I think you would be impressed. I think you would be impressed. All right. Let's start by talking about what we would do if, in fact, this this was the case. Right. Let's say, and you would add up the score, right? You would add up the score. So if it's a score of a three, then that would be considered most likely to be a very bullish year, and you could actually not only buy the stock market, but you could buy the stock market with leverage. That's the premise there. Right? You get your three, all three of these things work out. You can buy the stock market with leverage. Right? If you score a two, or if January is up, you can hold stocks, but no leverage. But no leverage. If the January barometer scored a one, or if it scored a one and January was down, right, then you would you would want to essentially more so hedge against a potential downturn in the market. Okay. Now, if it scored a zero, if it scored a zero, you'd be willing to to short the market, but no leverage. Okay, you want to short the market, but no leverage. All right. Now, now, okay. So let's take a look at how some of these Januaries played out, and we'll see what happened from there. Okay. We're gonna actually start with 2025. We're gonna do this in our normal fashion, right? So we're gonna let's just drop vertical right there. Boom. All right. That is the first week of January, 2025. So already, based on these standards, the first week is down, so we give a 0. Okay? From there, right, we open here, right? From there, January ends up closing to the upside, right? This is your last week of January right here, ends up closing to the upside. And on top of that, your last week is in the green. So you have what should have been a strong year this year. You have what should have been a strong year this year, and I think you were gearing up for a move higher, but then comes Donald Trump to take things to the downside, and I think that's also why you got such a quick recovery here. And it's also why you got such a quick recovery. Why I was willing to bet on a quick recovery. Usually, when something like that happens, you may not see me betting on a quick recovery. What's going on, Mr. Carr? Right? You may not see me betting on a quick recovery usually after something like this, but I know the January barometer gave us a reading gave us a reading of a 2 there, right? And January was up. So, that in itself suggested that uh, we should have had a reasonable year. We should have had a reasonable year, right? Now let's look at 2024. The 2024, all right? First week right here. Oh, it's all right. Need a vertical. All right. First week right here. First week is down. Rest of January is up, and we have a rest of January is up, and we have a an up last week of January as well. The last week of January is up as well. In this regard, right? This gives us a score of a 2, and we're willing to hold, but not with any leverage. Right? We're willing to hold, but not with any leverage. Okay? This is very simple stuff. Very simple stuff, right? Let's go at it again. All right. So here we can see first week in the green, last week in the green, and clearly we had a up January, right? So in reality, 2023, what was said to be a year where you can hold that with some leverage potentially, right? And you actually did end up doing all right in that regard, right? You know, you would have had to have been strategic in some of these areas, right? And looking to get out in some of these areas, but nonetheless, this was a perfect score. So even this right here, I remember we said this was the best buying opportunity of 2023. And you can just see it. Look at this, right? Pulls right back into that, close to the lows of the month of January, and that ends up being a nice, solid position that you could have taken. Now, watch this. Here we go. Watch this. Okay, 2022. We have our first week to the downside, but our last week is up. Right? And January itself is closing to the downside. In this particular case, right? You're scoring a 2, but January's down. You're scoring a 2, but January is down. If I'm sorry, you're scoring a 1, I meant to say. And you're scoring a 1 and January is down. My apologies, right? You're scoring a 1 and January is down. So that actually gave you the permission to go short, right? First week was down. The entire January was down, right? Even though the last week of January was up, right? The last week of January closed to the upside, right? So you scored a 1, but with January down, and that's the ideal. The ideal score of a 1 is if January is also down. That's the ideal score for a 1. If January's still up and you score a 1, which means the first week is down, the last week is down, but January was up. In that particular case, you have more of a hedging opportunity there as opposed to a shorting opportunity. All right. So just want to keep that in mind. Let's do a couple more here. 2021. All right. January is up. I'm sorry. The first week of January is up. All right. The last week of January is down. All right. Last week of January is down. However, all right. January itself. Let's see here. Let's go back over here real quick. Let's go to 2021. And let's go to the monthly for 2021. Let's check that out real quick here. So here we have the first week of January, and the first time where January closed. So you have a down January. You have a down January, and you have a down January and a down last week of January. Okay. Now let's talk about this. Now it's time to get into these statistics. Let's get into these statistics because this matters a lot here. Okay. So this was a score of a 1, but January. This was a score of a 1, and January was down. All right. This was a score of 1, and January was down. So notice I said, these scores of a 1 are, like they can be short opportunities or they could be hedging opportunities. Right now, I wouldn't have blamed anybody for going short here, right? But you would have this way you start to understand where you're coming from, right? You're coming off of these lows here. You got all this stimulus money being pumped into the market. You would have had to understand that. But let's go through the stats here. All right. A score of a 3 gives an average return of 13.3%. A score of a 2 gives an average return of a 10.5%. A score of 1 gives an average return of negative 1.2%. And a score of a 0 gives an average return of negative 7.5%. So your biggest down periods come when you score a 0. But there's more stats to go over, right? There's more stats to go over. All right. A January barometer of a 0, right? Over a 24-year span, that happened 6 times. Of those 6 times, the market was only down 1 out of those 6 times. Right? The market was only down 1 out of those 6 times when you scored a 0. Right? And that average return was a negative 7.5%. Okay? Now, let's talk about this. a score of a 3 was high. The market was higher for the full year 22 out of 24 times that happened. 22 out of 24 times that happened, the market was higher. So that's 92% of the time, and the average return was 13.3%. So what I'm getting at here is, I think for the most part, when you're dealing with down Januaries or you're dealing with scores of a 1, you have to be aware of the situation and know what's happening, right? Like in 2022, that score of a 1 came with the promise of higher interest rates. I repeat, in 2022, right, that score of a 1 came with the promise of higher interest rates. That right there, so that's a down January with a score of a 1, which is a bearish signal. But do you go short or do you not go short? You go short because they were promising higher interest rates. Go to 2021, you have a score of a 1, you have a score of a 1, but a promise of lower interest rates and a lot of stimulus money. You see the difference? Right? So in reality, let me just make this very clear. We are looking for 2s and 3s where January's up most of the time. That's what we're looking for most of the time. Okay? Now, when we get 1s and 0s, we assess the situation. Right? That's the reality of it. Because even when it scored a 0, the market was only down 17% of the time, right? A year later. And you can see how swiftly, I mean, this was from where's January at here? Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry about that, guys. Um, all right. So where were we at here? So where's the first week of January? Right here. All right. Why do I keep going horizontals? All right. So 1, 2. All right. So this is your last week of January right here. All right. So you don't quite close to the downside in January here, right? Your last week is red here. Let's check this out here. Let's go to the monthly. All right. Go to the monthly and check this out real quick here. So what is that? Is that slightly? Yeah, so you got slightly to the downside, right? For the month of January here. So you have a score of a 1 and January's down. You have a score of a 1 and January's down. This was 2020. All right. So this could have been an early signal for you. All right. So this could have been an early signal for you in 2020. All right. The question would have actually been, how confident would you have been or could you have been in the downside, right? That's the real question. But nonetheless, in recent days, a score of a 1 is what, a 2 out of 3 at this point, right? A 2 out of 3 at this point. We haven't had any scores of a 0 yet, right? January 2019. I mean, this is right here. We don't even have to look at this. This is a clear cut up January right here, and you can see what happened from there, right? By doing, let's delete that. It's a clear cut upward January right here, right? And you know, you can see 2019 just ran right up into 2022, right? This is most certainly a score of 3 right here. I don't even have to look at this, right? 2019 was a good year, okay? And so I can go through these over and over again. You get the point. You get the point, okay? All right, one. Let's see, where's the last week? Last week right here. So this is a score of a 2, right? Because you had the first week up, January up, right? Score over 2. Um, so yeah, you had your drawdown to start off the year, but this January barometer was giving you a 2 with an up January, which means that you would go long the market, but you wouldn't put any leverage on it. And this actually makes sense. Look what ends up happening, right? Um, so and then you finally take off, you know, to break some of the highs of the year later on, right? So this was a pretty flat year. Nonetheless, you kind of could have had a buy the dip mentality this year if you wanted to. All right, I'm gonna do one more. Let's do one more here, and then we'll just kind of recap, because I mean, honestly, this one is pretty easy to follow. This one is pretty easy to follow. All right, look at this. Right, this is clearly an up January. This is a 3 right here, and look what you get out of that 3. Oh my goodness, right? 2017 was beautiful. So let's just go ahead and recap. All right, let's just go ahead and recap. Right. Let's take a look at this. All right, this is what that looks like. I went from 2005. I went from 2005 to 2024. Right. Right. You could have went short here. 2022. Right. What else here? All right. 2015. You could have hedged up there. 2017. That was the year we were just talking about. 19% upside. 2018 ended up like we said. It was a pretty sideways year. You scored a 1 here. I'm sorry, you scored a 2 here, which kind of says hold the market. But uh, in that particular year, you know, you 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 hold, but you don't use any leverage, right? So of the short opportunities that we did have, you know, we had 2008 was a 0, by the way. 2008 was a 0. So of these short opportunities, it looks like we end up with what, about 2 out of 4 there that worked out. Um, about 2 out of 4 that worked out, or somewhere in that regard. This doesn't include you know so 2022, 2021, we were 2 out of 3, and then this one made it 2 out of 4, because this one, it says you could have shorted, but I'm sorry, 2 out of 5. I meant to say 2 out of 5. So three out of 5, 3 out of 5 on the short side worked out, right? So that's actually not bad at all when you really think about it in the grand scheme of things, all right? So the the point is simple, right? If let's go ahead and do this really quickly, right? Let me just make it clear once again. So if you have a week, the first week of January is up, the last week of January is up, and January itself is up, right? Then you get a score of a 3, right? And then that would mean that you're able to buy the market with leverage, right? If your January score is a 2, right? And you also want January to be up, right? You score 2, you want January to be up if you score 2, right? So one of those 2 points needs to be that January is up, all right? And with that, you can hold the market with no leverage, right? If you have a January score of a 1, right, then and with a score of a 1, you want January to be down with that score of 1. Right? You want January to be down with that score of 1. If that's the case, then right, we'll take a hedge, right, against the market, and we'll let things ride out, right? Now that means either the first week or the last week was up and January was down. All right. So the first week up, January down, last week down, or first week down, January down, last week, but the last week was to the upside. Right. One of those two combinations is what you're looking for when you score 1. And in that particular case, when you score that 1, you're looking for in that particular case when you score a 1, you're looking for you know for hedging opportunity, right? You just kind of hedge your portfolio just to make sure no downside creeps in on you, right? And then a January score of 0, right, which would mean that nothing worked out. The first week was down, the last week was down, January was down. These create awesome hedging opportunities, for the record, awesome hedging opportunities, but also, right, they create short opportunities if you know what's going on, right? Let's remember what we talked about so you have to understand what's going on in the environment in 2022, right? So you had a January barometer score of a 0 or a 1 there, right? Depending on how your charts were set up, it was either a 0 or a 1, right? And in this particular case, there was a promise of lower interest rates. I'm sorry, of higher. There was a promise of higher interest rates, right? We knew we were getting higher interest rates in 2022, so this was definitely a short. Okay, no ifs, ands, or buts. No need to think about it, right? In 2021, right? You had a score of a 1, but but you had a promise of lower interest rates with a lot of stimulus money. So in that particular case, you wouldn't have shorted the score of a 1 right here. You have to be very careful with that. Um, over the period that they studied in this book, right? Only 1 out of 6 scores of a 0 ended up with the market being positive, right? Only 1 out of 6, 17% of the time, the market was positive. So if you scored a 0 here, you have a pretty good chance of having a downward move in the market, right? A 7.5% average move to the downside, right? So other than that, um, that's pretty much it right there. As usual, after this, I'm going to open up a clubhouse session where you guys can come in and ask questions if you want to, and we'll do some more talking over there, right? Other than that, that's it for this session. I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube as a part of our dedicated to learning program. Everybody be blessed, stay well, and I'll talk to you soon. Later.